The frost was already setting into the ground by the time Elara tucked Finn in, his small, thin body a poignant reminder of the dwindling contents of her pantry. He asked for stories, not about princesses or knights, but about warm places, the sandy beaches he'd seen in old picture books, or the steaming kitchens of long-ago Christmases. Elara told him what he needed to hear, her voice steady, even as the chill in the air bit at her resolve. Finn was 3, and his hunger was the metronome of her life. Every desperate move, every sleepless night, was timed by his nutritional needs. Elara didn't look for trouble, but that night, trouble crashed right through the thicket behind her dilapidated cabin. It was a man, crumpled and unconscious, beside a sleek, overturned vehicle that looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of pine and dirt. He was dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her entire savings, if she had any. He was handsome, too, in a chiseled, arrogant way, even smeared with mud and a streak of blood on his temple. She dragged him inside. It wasn't charity, it was a calculation. A man like this, well-fed, meticulously groomed, was worth something. He had a gold card tucked into a slim wallet. Julian Thorne, the card announced. A name that sounded like the cover of a business magazine. A millionaire, lost and temporarily helpless in her humble, forgotten corner of the world. When he awoke 2 days later, disoriented and belligerent, Elara gave him the truth, but twisted it just enough to keep him grounded. "You've had a bad crash, Mr. Thorne. No phone signal for miles. I've fixed you up. You can stay here and recover, but you will pay me, daily, handsomely." Julian, the CEO used to commanding boardrooms, was reduced to a demanding patient in a single room that smelled faintly of pine needles and damp earth. His impatience was palpable, yet his escape was impossible. His wallet was in her care. His car was a wreck, and the nearest town was a day's walk. He reluctantly agreed to her terms, the transaction a bitter pill he had to swallow. For Elara, the daily transfers, small but miraculous, meant whole milk for Finn, and canned vegetables instead of dry beans. She had taken a millionaire as collateral to feed her son. The first week was a war of wills fought in silence. Julian sneered at her cracked teacups and the mismatched plates. Elara ignored his disdain, moving with the efficient grace of a woman perpetually short on time and energy. She cooked simple, nutritious meals, thick stews, fresh bread, and Julian ate them with the hunger of a man who suddenly realized haute cuisine meant nothing when you were truly empty. The emotional turning point didn't come with a grand gesture, but a small, clumsy exchange. Finn wandered into the room one afternoon, clutching a worn wooden block. Julian, distracted from his restless pacing, instinctively bent down. He didn't offer a patronizing pat or a hurried dismissal. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the floor and helped Finn build a shaky, ambitious tower. Elara watched from the doorway, realizing she hadn't seen Julian smile before, a genuine, uncalculated curve of the lips, devoid of corporate polish. He wasn't just a rich man. He was a man who had forgotten how to be human. And Finn, with the innocent simplicity of a child, was reminding him. Back in his world of glass towers and stock charts, Julian had believed competence was measured by ruthless efficiency and the size of one's bank account. Here, he saw competence defined by the ability to keep a small child fed and sheltered against overwhelming odds. One evening, Elara was patching a hole in the ceiling, the concentration etched onto her face, illuminated by a flickering oil lamp. He realized he was seeing a power that dwarfed any corporate takeover, the sheer, unwavering force of generative, protecting love. The irony was sharp. He, the master of industry, was learning the true economy of human need from a woman who barely had 2 pennies to rub together. Julian, in turn, began to see the meticulously curated chaos of Elara's life. He saw the worn soles of her boots, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when Finn coughed, and the sheer, exhausting effort it took to keep the light on and the pantry stocked. He realized the daily payments weren't for profit, they were for survival. He was paying her to allow her to keep surviving. Her life, that he was merely a client and she was merely a caretaker, began to thin, replaced by a mutual, unspoken respect. They started talking, not about business, but about dreams they'd deferred and the quiet weight of responsibility. The arrangement was unsustainable. A delicate glass house built on sand and desperate hope. The crash had been big news. The disappearance of Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, had been bigger. The local paper, delivered by a kindly neighbor, carried Julian's face on the front page. Missing CEO, presumed kidnapped or dead. Elara was peeling potatoes, the knife shaking in her hand as she read the headline. She had to tell him. Her mind raced, calculating the risks: kidnapping, extortion, the total destruction of the fragile security she had built for Finn. If she turned him in now, she could plead coercion, but the money, the milk, the medicine, the small warmth in the stove was proof of a transaction she initiated. She crumpled the paper, the fear of losing Finn eclipsing everything. But as she watched Julian staring out at the wilderness, a thought solidified. He was no longer her prisoner, but her partner in this quiet, desperate reality. She had to trust the bond they had formed, even if it meant risking everything. She found him on the porch, staring out at the woods, no longer looking like a prisoner but a man contemplating his next move. "Julian," she started, her voice dry, "they're looking for you. I know you're Julian Thorne. I knew from the credit card. I brought you here, and I took your money because—" She paused, unable to say the words. "To feed my child." He turned, his eyes soft. "Because Finn needed oatmeal, and you couldn't buy it without me, could you?" He finished the sentence for her, not with accusation, but understanding. He had seen the empty refrigerator on the first day, and he had seen the slow, incremental improvement over the last 2 weeks. "I was desperate," she whispered, dropping the knife. Julian walked to her, closing the space that had been defined by their separate classes and unequal terms. "You weren't desperate. You were a mother protecting her cub, and you didn't take my money. You charged me fairly for your care, your silence, and your courage. In my world, that's called negotiation." The love that sparked between them wasn't the sudden, blinding kind of fiction. It was the slow, steady warmth of two isolated people finding anchor in the storm, a love forged in the crucible of necessity, where Elara's fierce resourcefulness met Julian's sudden, raw humanity. He hadn't fallen for her because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she valued a can of beans over a diamond, and because her devotion to Finn was the purest, most uncompromising ambition he had ever witnessed. Julian left that afternoon, not in handcuffs, but in a quiet, official car that had been dispatched after he managed to hike far enough to find a working payphone. Before he climbed in, he kissed Elara on the porch, a kiss that felt less like a movie moment and more like a promise whispered against the cold wind. A week later, a registered letter arrived, not with legal papers, but with a trust document for Finn, and a simple note: "Negotiations complete. The value of your arrangement was priceless. Come home to me." The train set was followed by a visit, not a grand entrance, but a quiet SUV pulling up the muddy track. Julian stepped out, impeccably dressed, but the arrogance was gone. He looked at Elara, then at Finn, and knelt, putting him on his shoulders. Elara laughed, a sound that had been absent from the cabin for years. Their new life wasn't defined by the size of his estate, but by the small, everyday choices they made together. A kitchen warm enough for Finn to sit and draw, and a steady supply of milk that was no longer a matter of life or death but simply a guarantee. She didn't marry Julian for his money, but for the man he became when he had nothing but her stew and her truth. The love story wasn't about a millionaire finding a woman. It was about a woman finding the power to demand survival, and a man learning the true, priceless value of a home.